Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today's guest, like so many, were former classmates of mine at Osgood. And again, also speaks to keeping connections with the people you study with and throughout your profession there. So thank you so much, Chad. He is the general counsel at Audience View, and we're really looking forward to talking with you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Well, it speaks a lot about yourself that you can bring out so many of our former colleagues out. So good on you.
So, Chad, maybe you could tell us a little bit about, first of all, maybe what got you into, you also have the MBA side as well. So, talk a little bit about, law and business. They're getting into it and kind of trace, or maybe even just from my recollection here, the last 12 or so years since we were last at Osgood, what you went afterwards and where you are now here as general counsel at Audience View.
Yeah, for sure. So when we were doing Osgood together, I only found out about the joint program actually once I was at Osgood. I didn't even really know that it existed before then. And so then when I found out that you could still apply to various joint programs in your first year of Osgood, that's what I did. And so that's how I got into, and that was very common at the time too. I don't know if it's still as common now, but that's how a lot of people in the joint program came in at the time. And so I did the joint program. And at that time, it was really common to do it over 4 years. So you added on an extra year to do the program. So I did that, which was great. And, kind of to your point, the thing I really liked about the joint program, and I happened to do the business one, but just a different way of learning than at least at the time law school was, learning with a lot of 100% finals. And I kind of recognized just from like undergrad or what I perceived that, the business world or legal world would be like, that a lot of that different learning would be really helpful in terms of how you work with people and how you present and, get forced into teams. And I just, maybe I missed that a little bit when I started at Osgood. And so I really like that about the joint program. And that was kind of the reason why I went into it. And so then when I was in the joint program, I, did OCIs and, that kind of usual path. And so when I did the OCIs, that took me through to the full process, and I ended up summering and then articling at Castlesbrook, which was great. And, I think the magic for me when I was thinking about that, and, we can talk about that more later if it's something that's helpful for your audience at this stage, is, I was pretty reflective about what I thought would make me the most successful in that time of being a student and being a young lawyer. And I kind of had a bit of like, some unorganized chaos, but I felt like in my mind there was a vision, and Castles really fit that in terms of the types of people and the types of learning that I thought I would get there, and it worked out really well. And so I did that, and I came back as an associate, and I was in the securities group, and so I did capital finance and corporate finance and M&A for about 4 years as an associate, and then left private practice and actually traveled the world for 6 months, did, probably 5 continents, 30 countries with my partner. And, we just basically said to ourselves, well, they're kind of a great time and place. We didn't have a lot of responsibilities and, basically packed up our condo into a storage locker and, just decided this was something that we could do and had the flexibility to do. So we did that for about 6 months traveling around. And then when we came back, the really short version of it is I felt like I wanted to test again another way of learning and another way of contributing. And I thought that going into industry would be interesting because you'd work with so many different functions from marketing to, tech. And I just really wanted to experience what it was like trying to interact and support those folks on the ground every day in kind of the operational mode, and went to Indigo. And that was a wonderful, experience, a great legal team there. And so I did that for about 3 years and really learned the ropes of what it's like to be a generalist from being a specialist. So that was very cool. And, lots of great support from the lawyers that were there, and did that for about 3 years. And then I realized that the next learning that I was really keen about is I wanted to build something. And so I wanted to build a legal function. And I bought a lot of tech on the buy side at Indigo. And what I realized, I was interested in tech and I like tech. And I really wanted to build a function. And Audience View is a portfolio of companies, international portfolio, but headquartered in Toronto. And they were recently acquired by a private equity shop, and they were looking to scale. And so they're building out a lot of functions, including legal. And so it was a cool opportunity to go in there and build a function and hire and really just build out something that had never existed before. And that was really exciting to me. And so about 2.5 years ago, that's what took me to Audience View. And, we've kind of been there, and, we can talk about kind of what that company does and how we've survived the pandemic. But yeah, it's there's kind of been a bit of intention about it, and I think it really has just come down to, as much as I can, I try to be reflective about, my past 6 months. How's it going? How's it feeling? What does it look like as compared to what I want it to look like? And always trying to be a bit mindful about, what I think is going to allow me to contribute in the most effective way. And that's kind of what's taken me through these different steps along the way.
Perfect. So let's there's a lot there kind of to unpack. So let's kind of start because I do have some more Osgood students kind of helping out, and I think right now I understand the timelines. They're probably sending out their or preparing their OCI packages and getting ready for that whole process. I think it's back. I think last year it was kind of pushed for the pandemic, but so you had the experience there of going through that, and maybe you can share a little bit of insight because a question that trying to demystify the process there from someone a veteran like yourself is kind of what was it like, and maybe you can share some advice of people kind of going and preparing their resumes and cover letters and not necessarily knowing, like you were saying, well, hey, what do I need to put in here and how do I make myself the best candidate? So what can you share from that experience?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm really big on this topic, so I'm glad that we're talking about it because I think one thing that's really hard is, for myself, I didn't have any lawyers in my family. So, I didn't really know anything about the process other than what other students that were ahead of me had told me about it. And I always thought that was, kind of more challenging as I moved through it and was working at Castles and I was on the student committee, and I could tell when students kind of knew how the process was going to play out and how they didn't. And so I'm glad that, you're creating opportunities like this to kind of help inform folks who otherwise just wouldn't have had the opportunity. And so, if I think back to one on the applicant side, one thing I would say is that unless you have a very specific reason about what you are very certain you want to do, like maybe you were an engineer before, or maybe you were an accountant before, and you went to law school because you said, oh, I want to be like a patent lawyer, or I want to be a tax lawyer, and I know that, and I have all this history and reason. My advice would be don't self-select out of opportunities. The thing about law school, especially, it's so early on that you're required to apply, is that there's just, understandably no time to have really any knowledge about what it's like to work as a lawyer and to work in a specific field as a lawyer. And so I know that, from my experience, at least at the time, it's very tempting for some students because they had taken one IP course to say like, I want to be an IP lawyer. And it's like, well, you wouldn't know. And so I think the great thing about the process is, unless you have a very specific reason, if you do, good for you. I didn't know enough. Apply broadly, because I think that gives you the best opportunity to continue learning. And I don't mean to be inauthentic, as you move through the process and pretend. I mean, the starting point should be apply broadly so that you have more time to learn about the opportunities, and it'll give you the best chance to kind of figure out what makes sense for you. So that would kind of be like my starting point. When I was a student, I didn't know what I wanted to be. So I applied pretty broadly. And then it just became more apparent to me over time through the interviews what made more or less sense, at least at that stage. And so, if I think about what that next stage is, and I'm sure there's still like the OCI, like very short interviews where you meet one or two lawyers from the respective firms and you kind of move around like a merry-go-round depending on, your interview schedule and how many you do. That process is often a lot about you as a candidate. It's very short amount of time. And so, there's approximately, I think, about like 15 minutes, and 90% of that is going to be pretty devoted to you. So what I would say is, especially if that's not a familiar process to you, is think about what are the things that you care most about yourself as a human and what you can offer. One or two things. And so as an example, so for myself, I played college soccer, and I had, and now you get to hear the joys of having a young child as well. And I also had tried to start a business that would help other young lawyers, young athletes get scholarships. That business did not go very well. And so, but what I wanted to leave the interviewers with was a couple points that they would remember that were more specific about me. So they already knew what school I went to. I did the joint program, but like, oh yeah, that was the guy, he played this sport and he had tried to start a business. And, for reasons we can talk about more, is that like, there's a purpose to that, which is like making yourself memorable about the things that make you who you are. For me, sports mattered for a variety of reasons: teamwork, leadership, all that stuff. Starting a business, I was entrepreneurial. I cared about that kind of stuff, about learning, about other functions. Like that stuff kind of mattered to me, and I wanted them to know that. And then it also makes you more memorable. So I think that that's kind of like the initial stage of when you think about applying, and that first interview process is like keep it broad at the beginning, and then really think about your package that you've submitted and how you can tie back those points to kind of central themes about yourself that you can leave the interviewers with.
Yeah, that's great. I think, and you hit that point there. A lot of people who were, I mean, when we went to law school, and certainly probably today, that you don't have like a network of lawyers that your father, your grandfather weren't lawyers, so you kind of are just hearing it from upper year students, or maybe a
Mhm.
couple of people you might have had contact with, and it's sometimes challenging to know what kind of sort through what works and what doesn't work. The other thing that you had the benefit of was taking the MBA program, and I've talked to so many people over the year here, and we kind of reflect about, in law school we didn't learn some things about business, running your own business, if you're a sole practitioner, or things like docketing, and a lot of the practical things, and just people don't realize, especially my paralegal students, when it's just as much knowing how to build a network. It's just as much about knowing, in terms of setting up what kinds of things to do, and the business side of it. So maybe you could talk a bit more about, and certainly now you also have the benefit, and we'll get in this as well, of kind of looking at legal services on both ends, as a purchaser as well as a provider. And
Mhm.
what are some of the things that students need to kind of further augment themselves with, on top of what they're getting in terms of theoretical knowledge? And I'm sure they're doing more practical stuff these days, but
Mhm.
with, especially with legal tech and business and entrepreneurial, I mean, certainly, you're putting it in your OCIs there. I'm sure it's still just as much passion about that today as it
For
was
sure.
back then.
I think it's really important. So law school, and I agree with you, I think law school is trying to move a lot more into the way of teaching experiences than, maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So I think it's great. Um, I think still probably it leans quite heavy towards a theoretical knowledge. And, depending on where your vocation takes you, if you end up, as many do, in kind of the businessy world of providing legal services, that's only going to take you so far. And the legal industry is still developing in terms of how it trains lawyers. And to be honest, what law school is really like 3 years of allowing your brain to become a bit smarter in terms of thinking and breaking things down. But it's not separate from the more experiential stuff that's happening now. It's not really training you about like how it's going to be day one when you show up. Like this isn't a couple of early shifts before you start at your retail job for the first time and teaching you how to fold. It's not like that, right? Like you're reading out of books and your brain's getting a little bit smarter, but the real learning is going to come when you join some sort of practice or some sort of firm, and that's where you're going to probably get more of your training. And so that part of it is just like such a slim part, and that knowledge about a specific area of law kind of gets whittled down to like a bit more of like what the market requires you to know around law. Okay, that's a lot of that's going to be taken care of for you as long as you show up ready to learn and excited. That is table stakes to buyers of legal services. Like I don't go out when I'm buying legal services questioning whether the person is going to be reasonably smart enough and know enough about that area of the law. Like I take that for granted based on like the diligence I've done or peer recommendations. Like that's nothing special. It's a lot of work, but that's the point of being a lawyer, is that like that's table stakes. The two things that are going to become massive, and this is what I've kind of been on about a little bit around LinkedIn lately, is the human element of it, and knowing how to just be a human when you're, especially when you're a seller and you're trying to sell services, about like being curious, having like humility and respect and validation for the buyer, and using that curiosity and validation to provide like flexible, like humble advice that's like, okay, market might be like this, your client specs are this, your needs are this, in this way I've spent the time to learn from you because I have the humility to learn. And not about the law, about what it's like to sell something to someone. Like this is not a given anymore. Legal tech has massively disrupted legal services. Alternative legal service providers massively disrupted. The big four on the audit side are doing it. It's not a given anymore. People are just going to buy. So I think the human element is massive, and it's a huge differentiator because very few people think about it. And the other piece of what you talked about, which is like having some business sense. And so, like, yes, you can definitely do business degrees, business certificates, do a joint program. Also, reading the newspaper and Googling things gets you quite far in terms of like understanding what businesses do and what certain industries focus on and what their lingo means. Not so that you become like a lingo junkie. We don't need any more of that, but it's so that you can understand when they're speaking and use some terms and phrases that let them know that you get their world instead of trying to jam like a private practice language on businesses. Like that world is just not absorbed very well on the buy side. So I think that point you brought up about, the business element, and you can get that from a variety of places. The human element, those two pieces on top of the legal knowledge is just a foundation now. That's not the product. The product is those three things together.
Yeah, we can certainly go into that in a little bit more, but perhaps maybe we can compare, again, to build sort of what we were talking about before about not knowing exactly, you're saying don't rule any place out. So a lot of times people are making decisions and they weren't sure exactly what they would be getting into. So you had the experience of being now in-house and in a couple of places as well as working at Castlesbrock. What can you kind of share from the comparison of the two, and what would law students be expecting if they were going into either of those kinds of roles, and further on what other things, in terms of being the best at those roles, that they should be, again, adding to their palette there in terms of being able to succeed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they're very, very different worlds. The private practice world, of course, like each firm, depending on size and what they do, and they're all going to be different too. But I think it's at least a little bit easier, especially when you're talking about, I don't know, at least like grouping firms of like 50 or more together and kind of saying like, I can kind of give you a flavor of what that experience is going to look like. The in-house world is very disparate in terms of the experience there too. So, my thought process at least was a great thing. There's many great things about being trained in any professional service, law being one of them, is that the kind of expectation of your ability to push yourself is there, right? Like people are expecting you to try hard, to, like learn a lot and to deliver quality. And I think unless you've previously spent time in a very demanding industry, which I hadn't, I went right from undergrad to law school, like that's going to be new to a lot of people. The expectation, and I think things also are shifting, more recently from when I left, but still, I think the expectation around like quality and timeliness and learning, these are all good things, right? Like these are very good pieces to train yourself with so that you can arm yourself with really good young professional skills about being able to analyze quickly and write clearly and deliver many things, in a very condensed periods of time. Your brain sharpens a ton. So, and I kind of had forecasted that about like, okay, this looks like you're going to get some serious learning here. And it is. And I give a lot of credit to professional service people and the mentors in that industry. Some of my posts I've talked about like my mentor, at that time, one of them, and, Nancy Choi, who's just like amazing. Like there's people out there who really, really care about making you the best lawyer you can be. So I think, there's a lot to expect there. Of course, there's a lot of demands on your time, a lot of demands on your pressure, but you know what you're signing up to. So there's that. I think to compare that, a big difference between working in a firm and working in a business is in a firm, the vast majority of the people who work there are lawyers. So the good part is you can use a lot of shorthand in terms of like what you do and what you're working on, and you can evaluate other people's like offering and skill set and where they sit and, kind of what they're working on. You can evaluate that quite quickly, which is cool. The other thing is that's pretty much a topic of conversation all the time. And so, you're very much in the legal world. You go into a business and, first of all, you're not a revenue generator anymore. You're a support function. A lot of people, unless you're going into a big company with lots of lawyers, a lot of people don't really know what a lawyer does and what the value prop is and what the contribution is. And they work with lawyers very selectively. So there's a lot of like kind of relationship building to do, a lot of educating, a lot of building up of scale on a function because there's just an unlimited number of things to do. And so the kind of converse side on the business is you work with lots of different types of people. So you get to learn a lot from them. you have to do a lot of very friendly kind of coaching to them about the value prop you're trying to bring. You do lots of different things, which I personally like. Not everyone loves that. Some people like to be specialists. I kind of like the differences, so I like that. Um, and so you're building more, and also again, it depends on the company, but the demand on your time generally is probably slightly less intense. And so there's just those different kind of pro cons. And so for each kind of stage in your learning and your development in your life, it just might make more, or, one makes more or less sense to you as you're kind of developing and where your goals are.
Now, perhaps maybe it's a good time to tell us a little bit more about audience view, and you were talking about the pandemic and how that's kind of shifted a lot and disrupted. Use the word disruptors, but even that in of itself was a disruption there over the last. I mean, we're not quite out of it yet, too. But what kind of the different things you do as general counsel, and again, obviously, you're shifting from specialist to generalist. You got to be ready for kind of anything that's coming your way.
For sure. So, when you're in-house, unless you have a very specific in-house role, lots of the in-house roles are very general. And Indigo is the same thing. It could be like, corporate commercial to marketing to IP to construction, to privacy, all in a day. And it's the same, then you become a general counsel of a company, and it's all that plus you're leading a function. So there's the administration of like the budgeting and the hiring and, kind of the building of the function and its relationships and, stakeholder management. And so there's lots of stuff there. So yeah, lots of generalist stuff if you're not in a massive in-house legal function. At Audience View, what it is, a portfolio of companies, mostly North American and UK focused. And what it is, it provides B2B white label software products and some B2C offerings focused on the live events industry. So if you think about professional sports or music venues, comedy clubs, stuff like this, if you want to go to one of those, you have two options to buy a ticket, especially pre-COVID. You could buy it at the box office or you buy it online. And so if you think about the online experience, if you go to anywhere, if you type in any ticket you want to buy right now, one of a couple of things is going to happen. You're going to go to that website, you're going to click the buy button. One of two things will happen. Either kick you out to a marketplace, like a Ticketmaster or an Eventbrite, or you stay within that branded website of the venue that you went to and you buy the ticket within that channel. What our company does, it provides products that are that white labeled within the channel, within that kind of buyer experience. And the value prop there, as opposed to like Ticketmaster, which is obviously a massive marketplace, but the value prop is keep your customers buying their tickets and having that experience with you. Why would you want your customers to leave and go to a marketplace where the initial landing page might be buy tickets to your comedy club, but now I'm being reminded that the Blue Jays are coming back and, whatever else Ticketmaster is selling of the billion things. And so that's kind of what Audience View does on the B2B side of the business. And, if you think about that business supporting live events, the only thing that kind of slows down a business like that is an international event that stops all live events at the exact same time. And that's exactly what happened. And so, obviously that's a massive challenge to anyone that's kind of in this like leisure, events space. And so for us, no different, but, you make lemonade, right? So what we realized was a lot of these venues are going to be on pause for a bit themselves. And so what it allowed us to do was to do all of the things the companies in this portfolio had been wanting to do for many, many years, but they're too, kind of strategic to deploy so much resource against when you're running a business. Well, when all of our clients are pretty quiet, you can do a lot of things. So, kind of on the tech side, on the product side, on the infrastructure side, we've just spent 18 months kind of improving everything that we would have wanted to improve for years and years and years. And then we got to do it because we had the space to do it. And so, we fingers crossed that the world comes back pretty soon, and it is, especially in different places. So fingers crossed for that. But we're feeling stronger than pre-COVID coming out of it.
Now, kind of related to that, I mean, obviously before COVID, you had a chance to go and travel, and I thought really interesting. I mean, I don't know how many people in our profession kind of take, I'm finished here at Castle, I'm going to go and see the world, and certainly, we've I've talked quite a bit with people about mental health and kind of taking time for yourself, and I mean, it's probably quite the contrast for you. I mean, I would imagine, I don't know how soon after you had wrapped up at private practice that you did that. So what was that like? I mean, did that give you that recharge? And is that kind of what pushed you in the direction of, hey, you know what, I'm going general counsel now. I've seen private practice and I've enjoyed my last, I think it was 18 months, you said, right? What was that like?
Yeah. So, I think I was starting to come to a place in private practice where I said to myself, like, I've gathered, 4 or 5 years of really good skills. And so now it's kind of the decision point that you make where it's like, okay, do I want to become a super specialist in something? Do I want to try to become like a big revenue generator? Do I want to support a big revenue generator? Do I really love this thing that I'm doing? Because it's, credit to the people who are doing it. It's a serious effort that people are putting in, and they're super, sophisticated and spend a lot of time being up to speed on the latest and greatest in their field. For me, law law isn't really about like the black letter of the law. It never has been. I do it mostly just because I like helping people. I could have probably done anything. I happen to like the show Matlock, which is like a way back throwback, and I was so inspired by this guy who would like solve the cases on the stand and get people to admit to it. I chose law, but if there was a different show, I would have probably chosen something else. And so for me, what it was like, how do I help people? Ended up in law, and so then I said to myself, when I'm kind of done this 5 years at Castles, I said, like, I'm just not sure that this is where my passion lies to continue kind of doing this part for the legal industry. And I thought to myself, well, I'm a pretty curious guy. I'd really like to think about the industry side, but I didn't have that job lined up. I just felt it, in my heart that there was an opportunity. There's some moments in time, we didn't have our daughter at the time, didn't have, a mortgage. We were just renting a condo. Everything was very flexible. And we just said, like, there's a moment in time to do this. And, you don't know if you get to be 65 and do it. And you don't know how you're going to be looking at feeling at 65 or whenever you retire to do it. And so we just said, like, there's this time. And I don't think we're going to ever feel like we regretted that time, even if it meant, my partner gave up partnership and I was still a couple years away from giving partnership. But I don't think that mattered as much as this time. We still talk about it all the time and talk about that journey and, those kind of 6 months and just so many countries and experiences and learning from other humans. And I just think it felt right. It felt right for where our minds were at. It felt right about kind of a split between this was that world, and now we're going to shift to a new world, and we're going to take all these kind of human experiences that we see along the way and bring those and try to better ourselves as people. And it just felt like the right time. And so that was kind of the piece. And yeah, it probably took 2 of those 6 months for our brains to kind of unwind a little bit. I remember being in Berlin and just leaving our Airbnb one day. It was probably 2 months in, and I remember saying, like, I think I finally realized we're not just on a 1 week vacation where I still have to check my email. I'm still checking my Gmail, my personal Gmail. It's crazy, right? But, we eventually just got rid of all phones and just used paper maps and walked around like it was kind of 1980s tourism. And it was amazing. It's a time that may never get again. So it was a good mental health break that way too.
Perfect. That I'm glad that you had that opportunity. And again, like I think I would echo that. You're not going to regret going on those adventures. You're going to regret not going on those adventures when you're retired and say, hey, I should have done this and should have done that. Now you mentioned curiosity in there as well, and I know you've just posted about it. So let's talk about that, because you were sharing about now that you have the other vantage point here, that how do you differentiate? I think you were talking about differentiating yourself, and you had it all. You're saying, hey, I had it all wrong. I was looking at all these great lawyers at the firm, and I thought I had to do this and that. What have you
Right.
learned now on the other end, and what can you share for those who are in the private practice about kind of what they need to kind of look at in terms of client relationship?
Yeah. So yeah, I was kind of posting about, I was just reflecting about, when I was nearing the end of my time in private practice, and I was thinking to myself, like, okay, if I'm going to do this thing, how am I, I didn't feel like I wanted to be, Toronto's greatest security specialist. So that wasn't going to be an option. I kind of felt like I wanted a lot of interaction with humans because that's what motivates me. So I was like, well, a better version of that is probably going to be the client relationship person than the person supporting the client relationship person, because then you're more focused on the kind of the doing part. And like I said, the black letter law it's not my be all and end all. So I was like, well, there's really only 1 of 3 options that could possibly work. But how am I going to be like this rainmaker revenue generator when there's so many smart people out there and they're working so hard? And I thought, like, it just feels very difficult to see how I differentiate myself. And so, I kind of said to myself, I don't know if that's possible. I don't see the path. And so I said to myself, like, all right, none of these 3 things seem like they're a fit to me. So then I get on the buy side of legal services. And this is kind of like what I was saying before, which is it really isn't. Like, sure, there's people who are, know a bit more or know a little bit less or a little more up to speed based on their experience or how passionate they are. But often that doesn't make the day. Like, think about the amount of legal work that actually gets to firms. So if you call it 100% legal issues that happen in a business, I only see a slice of that, right? Like, so much stuff happens whether people know it or not in businesses that they don't even tell an internal legal function about, even if maybe they don't even have one. So you got this massive slice of legal risk that just lives in a business. Then if you've got a legal function, they take on some of the next slice of legal. It's only like the last, for many businesses, like the last 10% that ever leaves to go out the door to a law firm. And so the being the smartest person in your city or your country about a thing, it's extremely difficult to do. And even if you did it, it's subject to the buyer's point of view. So there is no objectivity in I am the smartest, right? So buyers of legal services are saying like, I can sniff it out pretty quickly about whether you know enough, because businesses have a risk appetite that ranges depending on what they're trying to do. They don't always need it to be the perfect thing. And so what is it then that allows you to stand out? Well, it's a whole bunch of other things, not if you're the smartest. It is how friendly you are. Can you tell a joke or share a story? Can you relate? Are you responsive? It's all these kind of, can you be curious enough to find out how your buyer of your service is going to use what you do? Like, it's using that curiosity and humility to provide a service in a very human way. Because the legal tech piece, like I'm using legal tech, the legal tech piece is going to eat up a whole bunch of stuff. The rest of it, the reason why I will buy and why I move with lawyers when they move to certain firms, is the human element of how people present themselves and how they show up. It's too difficult for me to know if every specialist is the best. And lots of times, good enough is good enough.
Yeah, I think it's great over the last couple of months, I think, or at least a couple of months I've been seeing them, different posts there about kind of sharing that insight. And so we were talking about before, again, putting things out there, and people can kind of like digest it. And I know even your 2-year-old there kind of was a source of something as well there that you just posted about, I think it was yesterday or the day before. And how, talk about that kind of, again, building on that human element that you were just sharing. Now, what else are we looking at, that we're missing kind of in this race to maybe learn and be better? Even going back into law school, right? I mean, it was all about like trying to learn and do the best there, right? But an important piece there as well is making those connections, because 20 years later, you're not going to remember. I mean, maybe you remember the gold medalist or something, but you're going to remember the people you had fun with and you had these adventures with and traveled and studied late nights. And maybe you could talk again a little bit more about how your 2-year-old kind of made you look at the magic there as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you ever have read kids' books, a lot of them are really about like the fundamentals of humans before external pressures, because the best kids' books, at least in my opinion, are like trying to teach kids about being good humans. And they're not worried about everything else that the world is going to throw at them later, but about teaching them how to like be themselves. And so there's this, there's lots of them, but there's one particular book I was talking about. It's called It's Okay to Be Different. And I think about this stuff, like my daughter has parents that, don't look exactly the same and, have different last names, and, she has glasses, and there's lots of things about every kid that's different. And, we want her to know, like, straight away. First, I think the best quote in the book is at the beginning, and it's something like, did you know that everyone was different? It's true. If everyone was the same, how would you know who was who? And so you think about that and it's like, well, everyone's already different. So even it's okay to be different is probably an understatement. It's like, it is true. Everyone's different and it's a good thing. And so, we try to teach this stuff with our daughter to the extent, she's absorbing it. And I think about this stuff kind of in our industry too, is that especially when you get into the stream, that I was in, that I started my career in, is that there's a lot of pressure to look and feel the same. Well, guess what? The buyers don't look and feel the same, many of them, and they're all humans underneath it all too. And I think this, I don't know if fear is the right word, or at least pressure to always feel like you know everything about everything and it always looks and feels a certain way, is for some buyers that might work. For many buyers, it doesn't feel authentic. There's no connection, there's no bond there. And so what I feel like it happens, and many of my peers share this, is that like it becomes very commoditized. like if I can't make a connection with you, to your point about like making connections with, like we did with our friends at Osgood, everything's just a commodity. And then you don't care who supports you, who's your advisor, who you spend money with. But if you try to find things about yourself that are authentic, that you want to share with others and make connections about, to your point, this is why, like, you and I, like, we haven't talked for 10 years maybe, but within a heartbeat we're kind of back having a conversation that we probably would have had a similar one 10 years ago, and we're more than happy to do it. And so these are the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately as a buyer of services. And if I had known some of this stuff when I was in firm, if I'd felt the passion to stay, that's how I would have differentiated myself. I wouldn't have worried about trying to look and feel the same, because that's a commodity game. And that wouldn't have been authentic to me. I would have tried to find what was real to me and find people who get that. Because when you make that connection, those bonds stick.
Yeah, and I think if you think one of your other things there, you end that with a little exclamation mark instead of a period. It spins it there positive as well, right? Another trait there to have. I think it's always great there. Obviously, if you can leave people smiling, rather than especially you can't really see some of the tones there as well, right? When it's just a period there. So Chad, always a pleasure there talking. Like I said, it feels like you said, like 10, 12 years ago, or 15. I think it's 15 years since we would have started law school. I know it's almost August. So the next batch of, I guess, the class of 2024 is probably getting there. I feel old now. But maybe you could talk to them or any of my students that are listening still, and or anyone else tuning in. Any final words of wisdom? I know you've shared so much there, and you continue to share on LinkedIn. And if anyone certainly wants to connect with you, just I would probably think maybe LinkedIn's their best there. But any final words of wisdom? And thanks again for joining us here today.
Oh, thank you for having me, and everything you're doing for the industry to kind of make it more human. It's important and it's a big deal. So thank you for doing that. I guess what I would say is maybe on that last point you said about an exclamation point. So that was something that I took from one of my mentors, Nancy Choi, when I started at Castles. Was she would, and it was very authentic to her, but like she would always try to bring the positivity and the enthusiasm to something that could have just as easily ended with a period. And that enthusiasm, just like negativity, is contagious. And when you create and you generate positive energy, and so whether you're in an OCI, and it's like, listen, you don't have to smile like a clown, but like, wanting to be somewhere and making other people feel like it, whether it's through eye contact or a smile or body language, or, a comment or question that's specific to that connection, it demonstrates enthusiasm that's memorable. It creates a bond. And that's what matters, right? Like everything is a choice in life. Most things are a choice in life. And if you're going to make a choice to do something, if you can put a smile on it and an exclamation point sometimes, like it brings a lot to the other side, whether you know it or not, but it leaves people with a warmth that's very memorable. And you do that very well too.
Well, thank you very much again, Chad. And again, thanks for everyone for tuning in again. And all the best there with your role there in general counsel, and certainly look forward to seeing more of your posts. Think it's great, and anyone that's able to give back to the field all this knowledge there, right? And I think people should be soaking it up, because I think when we had social media, it was for a very specific purpose, and you would like delete it right before OCI is there and stuff like that. But now with LinkedIn, I mean, I learned actually LinkedIn was actually around when we were in school, but maybe we just never knew about it. What someone was telling me that they created a profile way back when. But again, all the best to you, Chad, and thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me,
everyone.
Cheers.